Hey all, does living in a haunted house seem like a pretty cool idea to you? Well, just try telling that to people who aren't really down with it and just want to live normal lives in a normal house in a normal neighborhood. Boring, but sometimes boring is good. But that wasn't the case for one couple in Pennsylvania who moved their kids into a place they thought they could raise them in and not have to worry about contemplating paranormal theories.
You know what it could be? Past life experience intruding on present time.
In fact, they would move into a house that would eventually drive them away and never come back. So check the fine print on your purchase and sales agreements because this house is extremely strange.
At 46 South Wells Street in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, sits a house that has been believed for years to be haunted. So intense is the paranormal activity that has taken place there that it has been called the Amityville House of Pennsylvania. Like its namesake, its history is also marked by tragedy, death, and misfortune. But by contrast, the strange occurrences there have been documented during multiple investigations of the property. The house was constructed in 1861 by Augustus C. Lanning, who was one of the first industrialists to locate to Wilkes-Barre. The land on which the house was built was inherited from his mother, and like many properties in Pennsylvania, the land had a tumultuous history of conflict between indigenous peoples and European settlers. Lanning had already experienced some misfortune in his life, as one of his factories had burned down in 1850, a year that also saw a bizarre family tragedy ensue when his 23-year-old nephew perished under a strange circumstance. Lightning had struck a wooden barn, catching it on fire. The young boy was trapped under a horse who had already succumbed to the blaze and could not free himself from under the animal's weight. Just a few weeks later, a 54-year-old man named Joseph Brett suddenly dropped dead of a heart attack while walking past the house. By 1869, Lanning had sold the house and his business. He would die in 1875 at the age of 67. But that was hardly the end of the strangeness and tragedy associated with the home. Over the next 80 or so years, the home was sold at auction 3 times, once for the meager sum of $1 in 1939. In that time, 4 deaths were reported on the premises, not counting 2 suicides, one in 1940 and another in 1950. It had 6 owners in all. But the goings-on at the home reached a crescendo in 1975, when it was purchased through yet another auction by New Haven, Connecticut disc jockey Walker Bennett and his wife Mary Ann, who moved to Wilkes-Barre with their 2 daughters so he could begin work at local station WARD. When they began to hear strange noises coming from behind the bedroom wall, Bennett tore down the wall and discovered a tin box whose contents were a red ribbon, a human molar tooth, and chicken bones tied together in the form of a cross. This led Bennett to believe that perhaps some sort of voodoo witchcraft curse had been placed on Augustus Lanning by Haitians who had settled in the area that were hired by a jilted lover, as these items, particularly the chicken bones, were often used in such rituals. In early 1976, a knock at the front door would result in the appearance of a translucent figure bearing a cane and sporting a crooked and vicious smile that Bennett would come to identify later as the spirit of Augustus Lanning himself. This was followed by the sight of a ghostly young girl wearing a nightdress that would wander the home and appear to walk through solid walls. The presence of blood was also a source of terror, as the walls were sometimes spotted with it, and at one point a pool of it formed on the living room floor. On occasion, the foul smell of decay would emanate from the kitchen, and the family would often be terrorized by the sounds of screams, groans, voices, and crying that would originate in the walls and attic of the house. These would often be accompanied by heavy disembodied footsteps across the floors. The normally happy family suffered through a series of inexplicable illnesses as well as bouts of depression. And then in January of 1977, things turned darker when Bennett said he watched as his daughter was pushed down the stairs and wound up floating to the bottom, where she landed on her feet completely unharmed. This exact scene repeated itself only 1 month later in the presence of his wife. The Bennetts summoned Reverend James McGahagan from the Holy Trinity Rectory to bless the house, but it seemed not to have any effect at all on who or whatever was the source of their torment. McGahagan went so far as to write the realtor on the Bennetts' behalf, stating while it could not be proven there was a supernatural force in the home, the family needed to leave the house for their own psychological well-being. The house was also visited by psychic medium Mary Passarella, who, like the Warrens, had also taken part in the Amityville house investigation. Passarella suggested they do an historical workup on the house, and that the spirit who resided there either be pacified or the house torn down completely. As if the house itself became aware of her guidance, activity there ramped up almost immediately after she left. The kitchen floor collapsed into the basement, and the heating and plumbing systems developed a host of issues. Bennett claimed that the activity would become more pronounced around certain religious holidays, be they Jewish or Christian. A menagerie of animals kept by the Bennetts began to exhibit strange and sometimes violent behavior, and in some cases inexplicably dying after fits of madness. A third daughter, born while they were living there, was but 9 months old when an antique doll was found among her toys. Neither parent had brought the doll into the house and were at a loss to explain how it got there. And then a year later, Walker Bennett awoke to the sound of thunder, though the night was clear. He then heard intense footsteps pacing across the floor of the attic, while the front door began to rattle and dishes flew off shelves in the kitchen. This disturbance was accompanied by the sound of a child crying that seemed to come from directly inside the walls. It was now March of 1978, and the Bennett family had suffered enough in their 3 years living in this house of horrors. They subsequently fled the home, leaving behind much of their belongings. The ordeal took a heavy toll on Walker Bennett, who fell into debt to the tune of $40,000 as he couldn't sell the home, drank and smoked heavily as a result of the goings-on there, and underwent professional counseling. The resulting publicity surrounding the house drew the attention of famed investigators and demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren, who traveled to Wilkes-Barre in 1980. The house was locked up tight, so they sat outside where Lorraine declared she sensed a terrible despair and that the house would affect anyone who lived there very negatively. She further said she felt whoever lived in the house would likely suffer some very negative effects like separations or personality changes. Lorraine also claimed to sense that those living there had been driven to self-destructive behavior through drugs and alcohol, as she could smell gin, and that perhaps there were even contemplations of taking their own lives. She concluded the spirit there was earthbound and had not transitioned at this point in time. Lorraine went so far as to describe the entity as a burly German man, perhaps a blacksmith by the name of Heister, and also felt the presence of his young wife. The bank eventually foreclosed on the house due to lack of payment and rented it to tenants Mary and Harry Gailey, who reported no incidents there and moved out after a year, citing the house as a bit too big for them. It then sat empty until it was purchased by Catherine Wilkins for $20,000 in 1982. Watkins, a skeptic, claimed not to believe in ghosts or haunted houses and moved in with her own 2 daughters. They would experience their own unexplained occurrences, with beds shaking, objects moving about, and lights and TVs turning themselves on and off. But despite such incidents, they were able to coexist with its other occupants and Catherine remained there for 30 years until her death in October of 2012. Her oldest daughter inherited the house and chose to put it on the market, where it found its eventual buyer in 2013 in the person of paranormal investigator Tim Woods, who, despite paying only $41,000, had no immediate intention of renovating, but rather investigating. Woods had previously founded Live Sci-Fi in 2006, a company that live-streamed all manner of hauntings and ghost hunts. Before he decided to purchase the home, he and his team conducted a number of investigations there beginning in October of 2013 and ending in February of 2014, where they were joined by fellow investigators Dave Spinks and John Zappin. The investigations resulted in a 48-hour live stream and 30-hour video diary recapping the goings-on there, a total of 31 videos in all that can be found on YouTube. Woods described how he was hit forcefully in the stomach by an unseen force as they spent the night in the home, and during one prior night in the house, Wood claimed a Twitter viewer pointed out an unseen force that seemed to grab at his shirt while a recording of an exorcism prayer was playing in the background. The group's techniques ran the gamut from EMF meters, cameras, and recorders to Ouija boards. The house now sits empty and back on the market, under the watch of neighbor Betsy Summer, who will only claim that some very strange things have happened there over the years. There have been a number of break-ins and attempted break-ins over the years, the most recently reported being a 33-year-old man named Anthony Parker, who in 2018 was caught in the act of trying to enter the home, armed with a shotgun, a sword, brass knuckles, a pocket knife, and a copy of the Bible. He told police he was there to look for ghosts and that he was friends with someone who knew the owner. This obviously was not true, and it's not certain what his worst miscalculation was: parking his car the wrong way on a one-way street to draw attention to himself, or believing he might engage in a shootout or a street fight with ghosts.
Note to Mr. Parker, killing anything that's already dead is a bit redundant. So the house at 46 South Wells Street in Wilkes-Barre still exists today, and for a relatively modest sum by today's standards of $106,000, it's yours for the taking. Just be aware that it comes with live-in tenants who can be a bit of a handful, and evicting them might prove to be quite a daunting task. Good luck in your new home.